Startup. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much, Claire, for that lovely introduction. It really is a privilege to present to you today, to be the first of the speaker series for the CGIC. This is an area of huge interest to me, just because of my own personal journey, but also the opportunity, I think, to help fellow governance professionals, because I see us as a community. And so I hope that you enjoy this session and get some useful ideas that will really act as food for thought, that will stimulate your thinking, because this is a really important topic. It's a highly important topic. There's a lot of discussion around EQ and emotional intelligence and what that means. So in this session, what we will be doing is discussing those EQ skills that can be applied by a corporate secretary or a governance professional. And I'll use those terms interchangeably because as anyone working really in the corporate governance field, arguably governance professionals require more of those soft skills than any other position in the organization. So the objective of today's session is really to give you a clear path and strategies to help you develop your emotional quotient with specific application to your role as a governance professional. One thing I would mention is that in a 1 hour session, it's really only possible to scratch the surface of what really is a huge subject. But please feel free to put comments, questions in the chat function, and we'll have time at the end to address all of those. And I will also be conducting a couple of polls as well, just to get your thoughts and ideas around this very important topic. So why me? So I got into emotional intelligence, or EQ, emotional quotient, because I was often frustrated in my career about how things turned out. I always blamed others for my failings and often adopted a victim mentality. I also had a number of, should we say, negative interactions with peers, and really adopted, I guess, that attitude of, well, I'm in the right here and not them. Now, these were negative interactions with people that clearly didn't possess EQ, and I highlight some of those in my book, but I've no doubt that you've had similar situations. But I also had to look at myself and my own conduct as well, which was less than perfect. But when I read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, how it can matter more than IQ, a light bulb went off for me. I realized that I had to make changes from within. So I set about working on some of those principles in the book. And when I began to practice and to apply those principles, I found much better responses, particularly in my working relationships. And as I dived deeper into EQ, I thought about how important it is for the modern governance professional to have a range of soft skills, particularly given the evolving role of the corporate secretary and board directors. And indeed, when I first started supporting boards 25 years ago, the composition of the board was very different. There was a complete lack of diversity relative to what we see today. And boards and their support functions, including governance professionals, have evolved through necessity. When you think about governance scandals, social upheaval, climate change, technology, all of these things have impacted us, but there's still a long way to go. And the pressures, expectations, and potential liabilities are radically different today, and that evolution will continue. So that's why I've really continued to read widely on this subject. As Claire mentioned, I'm a certified life coach and group coaching practitioner and qualified to conduct EQI assessments, which I'll talk about later. And as many of you may know, I've also written a book recently released entitled EQ for the Governance Professional. Now, that book examines the vast range of skills that the modern governance professional needs when dealing with difficult boards, demanding management, and everything in between. And these are skills that are not taught in the classroom. And so what I attempted to do in writing the book was really to examine the various facets of EQ and how they specifically apply to the role of a governance professional. And the idea is to provide simple, sort of practical guidance that will equip you with the challenges that you may face, and often avoid costly on-the-job learning and perhaps even career-ending mistakes or failures. It was really a labour of love because I felt that the profession needed something like this to guide us in our jobs. And I was fortunate enough to get some great people helping me with some fascinating case studies as well, which I think will resonate with most of you. So what will you learn today? So here's a very brief outline of what we'll cover here. We'll start off by looking at the new governance landscape in which we work and the evolving role of the governance professional and the greater emphasis on the range of soft skills that we need to apply and flourish in our job. We'll look at EQ and the EQI model, and we'll study some of the ways in which EQ can have a significant impact on your influence and your relationships in the workplace. We'll briefly touch on some strategies for developing EQ. Now, I don't wish to leave you empty-handed as well, so I will be equipping and leaving you with a few practical exercises to get you started on your EQ journey. And these are taken from my book, of which I have many more practical exercises and examples for you to work on. So if we think about the current governance landscape, there's the impact of market forces. There's a greater social expectation on corporations. There's a younger generation now in the workforce, millennials, Gen Z. They're tomorrow's leaders and captains of industry. They're only really prepared to work for companies that share their ethical and environmental values. Equally, consumers are becoming more discerning about environmentally friendly products or products that do not cause harm to the planet, its ecosystem, its inhabitants. And consumers are willing to pay higher prices for goods that are produced in a responsible manner. For example, the raw materials being obtained from sustainable sources, organizations that don't exploit the supply chain in their labor, in the labor that makes and assembles the products. There's a greater brand awareness and scrutiny regarding fair trade. Then we think of the social media. This has an enormous influence on the way companies are perceived by communities. And an organization's reputation that has taken decades to build can be torn down in minutes by unfortunate or inappropriate comments from the business leaders or other sort of scandalous behavior which can quickly go viral. Then we have shareholder activism, which has steadily grown, particularly since the Great Recession. And these activist investors have put pressure on companies to engage in meaningful ESG conduct and report on its ESG activities. And failure to do so could put directors and officers really under the microscope, negative publicity and criticism for failing in their stewardship role. Similarly, the increase in inequality in the 21st century, which has really, to me, only been accelerated by the global pandemic and has led to accusations around corporate greed and moral outrage against a number of financial companies that were bailed out by governments using taxpayers' money because they were considered as too systemically important to fail, despite reckless risk management processes. And there's a tendency now, a trend towards companies and big businesses being more responsible as members of the community and considering all stakeholders as good corporate citizens, particularly as a lack of trust in governments deepens around the world. I recently attended a fantastic seminar by Dr. Mervyn King of the King Reports in South Africa on that very subject. Then we have major institutional shareholders experiencing pressures to be perceived as good stewards, to manage their portfolios by investing in funds and companies that are perceived to be more socially responsible. And so all of these things are integral to a company's fortunes and a barometer for investment decisions. And so when we think about ESG and all of the other governance trends, these are more likely to affect the company's financial bottom line than ever, more than ever. So what does that mean for the governance professional? Well, I see the governance professional as being at the forefront of that corporate evolution by helping directors and officers to recognize their role as a conscience of the company and to cultivate the right ethical mindset. They'll help their companies to become those good corporate citizens, recognizing that in today's high-speed media world, reputation is everything. And so the governance professional needs to cultivate a greater focus on outcomes-based governance, moving away from that traditional compliance tick box approach to a governance framework that contributes to the concept of enterprise value creation and engenders the trust and confidence of the community in which it operates. This means that it's about developing skills and behaviors that were traditionally outside the remit of the corporate secretary, the governance professional, which was considered more of a technical role and for you to be a technical expert. But now there is a greater emphasis on those soft skills. I see strong EQ as particularly important for governance professionals, particularly because we often have no line authority. And so we need to be an influencer, which means having the credibility to act as a trusted advisor. And as you'll see, that's a combination of the technical, but also going beyond the technical. Because of course, technical experience and expertise is critical. It gets us in the door and we use it to demonstrate our mastery of our subject area. And we use that technical expertise every day in our role to make judgment calls based on our experience, to consult with individuals and to offer advice and guidance. And we build our influence by technical expertise. But the evolving role of the governance professional means that there is an increased focus on those soft skills, and we're moving more and more towards an increasingly strategic function within the business, and therefore we need to have a wider range of EQ attributes. So where are we now? So I thought it'd be helpful just to sort of give an idea of some of the things that are impacting us today, in our current environment. And so the impact of COVID-19, of course, a huge impact on the workplace culture. It's caused huge economic disruption to many businesses, and there's a need for them to be way more agile. I mean, some have benefited, like Zoom, as an example, gaming companies. Some did not, airlines, cruise liners, oil and gas, restaurants. But there's been a rapid adoption of digital tools and an increase in remote working, and really needing an incredible resilience for companies to make that happen fairly quickly. I recall that when COVID happened, I was in the Middle East, and my organization had to literally move a staff of 8,000 to remote working, so that only 10% of us were left in the office. And they had to do that over a period of literally within a week or so. So that, as you can imagine, that required a huge degree of versatility around technology. So what will be the new normal? Will it spell the end of the rush hour? And what will your organization look like in terms of staff demographics? And what policies will need to be put in place? And from a Harvard Business Review article that I read last year, according to a recent survey, almost 90% of people say that their workplace well-being has declined since the start of the pandemic. And so the causes range from increased workloads, a lack of connection to others, and growing disengagement. And combined, these symptoms suggest something that's fairly dire, but not surprising, which is that people are really burned out. And so there's a real move towards remote working, and people are now less inclined to commute. There's been that shift in work-life balance. I mean, many people have got more family time, and they're probably less likely to give that up. There's still this fear of crowded offices, particularly with the variants as well, again, surfacing. And how will businesses be affected? And as they try and get employees back, there's likely to be resistance. So how does your business manage these potential conflicts? And what guidance should you be giving to your board around these issues? Mental health, of course, the impact of COVID has caused huge social isolation, and with it, of course, what I see is a hidden epidemic, which is the mental health issues. And companies cannot wash their hands of this for their employees. I mean, if they manage it well, then the employees are likely to be far more productive. And I expect to see a revolution in the way that companies look after their employees. I think there will be more resources available to support work-life balance and to develop the resilience of employees, and that there'll be less stigma and more openness around discussing mental health. We think about the millennials coming into the workplace. I mentioned that earlier about the fact that the millennials will be tomorrow's captains and leaders of industry, if indeed some aren't already the case. And millennials will represent 75% of the global workforce by 2025. So employers need to adapt to a generational shift in demand from these employees and who comes after them, which means a need for flexibility, for example, in terms of work-life balance and remote working. But also, of course, millennials will, there's a need for them to do meaningful work that aligns with their values. There are no jobs for life, but loyalty is a two-way street. And McKinsey calls it the war for talent. So how can employers position themselves to attract the best talent? So how do you redesign the office workplace, the culture and the policies to accommodate the demands of millennials and Generation Z and whoever comes after them? And I think one of the key things is that there will be a need for investment in employees to step up and to provide training on areas such as EQ, coaching and career development, and a better work environment to create that psychological safe space, as it were. And there's a need for employers also to train leaders to be better in soft skills. There was a previous emphasis on technical abilities, and what tended to happen was that technically gifted people were promoted to become managers without preparation and expect them to excel. They didn't have any real training in this area. I hope everyone can, yeah.
Sorry, Paul, sorry to interrupt. I think your mic is a little bit, needs just to be adjusted a little bit.
Right, okay, sure. Let me just try that. How does that sound, Claire? Is that better?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Thank you.
Lovely. And I'll try and speak up and be loud as well, but I'll try not to blast everyone if I can. But yeah, please let me know if it's if I go quiet. So thanks for that. So, you know, when we think about all these areas, though, these are coming down the tracks. These are all areas that are really coming down the tracks. So if indeed they're not already here. So you as individuals, you need to be mindful, but also in your role as advisors to your companies. And one thing that I'd like you to walk away from today is to consider, assess the level of EQ in your companies. Are your executive management team and your board doing enough to support the workplace and the well-being of employees to make for more engaged employees? That's what I'd like you to really think about for your organization. So now we've talked a little bit about EQ. What is emotional intelligence? What is emotional quotient? Well, emotional intelligence is a set of emotional and social skills that collectively establish how well we perceive and express ourselves. So it's about how we see and understand ourselves and how we express those thoughts and how well we develop and maintain social relationships. So EQ is a personal measure, the emotional quotient. It's a little bit like IQ, the intelligence quotient. So EQ is a measure of how much emotional intelligence you possess. And one message that we are often given is that emotions have no role in the corporate environment, and that anything that you're feeling in the workplace should be suppressed. Now, I beg to differ, because emotions provide valuable data that can help us to recognize situations and how they are impacting you. And through intelligent use of that data around your emotions, you can be more balanced and productive in your work. Now, we don't have time to go into the history or the science of EQ in this session. However, I can say that if you didn't think that EQ was important, here's a few things for you to consider. First of all, a leader survey by Google rated technical skills as only 8th in the list of attributes needed by a leader. The other 7 were soft skills. The World Economic Forum rated EQ as one of the 10 essential abilities for the future. So EQ is that skill that marks out future leaders. In other words, IQ is not a predictor to becoming a top executive. Now, according to Daniel Goleman, the guru for EQ, and this is supported by extensive research, EQ is the largest single predictor of success in the workplace. It's really the factor that sets high-performing individuals and high achievers aside from the rest of the crowd. He said that this is especially true in roles that are really at the higher level and professional executives, where everyone is just about as smart as everyone else. So how they manage themselves and their relationships gives those elite the best, the edge. In other words, it's the social and EQ skills. And from the course that I attended with him last year, he stated that the ingredients for star performance and leaders was around 15% IQ and 85% EQ. In other words, technical expertise and IQ gets you in the door, but EQ is what will get you promoted. But what EQ is not, and there's some common misconceptions around EQ, it's not IQ, okay, intelligence quotient. That often tends to be fixed by the age of 17 and right throughout life. Whereas EQ develops over time, and it's a trait which will increase over time with practice. It's not personality either. EQ and personality are very different. Again, personality is relatively fixed from an early age and can't really be developed. You are what you are. But EQ is something that, again, it changes over time with practice. So when you think about personality, that will measure different things to EQ. For example, whether you're an extrovert or you're an introvert, how you perceive things, for example, the way that you take in information, whether it's visually, auditory, etc., whether you're coldly logical or more sensitive. Emotional intelligence measures how you use your emotions whilst you're taking in information and making decisions. And so personality and EQ are very different, but they also complement each other in many ways. And so both are important in building self-awareness and increasing your personal effectiveness. EQ also is not about vocation as well. It's not about really thinking about what you want to be. We use emotional intelligence in our day-to-day lives in everything we do. And the thing I love about it is the fact that there's always a testing ground for you, because all of our interactions involve using EQ. So what is the EQI model? This was developed by Reuven Bar-On, who is an Israeli psychologist and one of the leading pioneers and researchers in emotional intelligence. And this model measures emotional intelligence on 5 composite scales, all of which are made up of 3 subscales that you can see in the model here. So let's look at these composite scales very briefly, one by one. First of all, self-perception. This concerns what we generally refer to as the inner self. It determines how in touch with your own feelings that you are, how you feel about yourself and what you're doing in life. And success in this area means that you're aware of how you feel strong, and you have confidence in pursuing your life goals. And so the 3 subscales that make up self-perception are self-regard, self-actualization, and emotional self-awareness. Then we look at self-expression. This is how we it's an extension of self-perception, because it's the expression of those feelings and emotions that we've already identified in our self-perception. It serves to regulate your behavior, and it allows you to express your feelings in an effective, appropriate manner. So it's how you manage your emotions so that they don't overwhelm you. And so the 3 subscales that make up self-expression are emotional expression, assertiveness, and independence. Then we look outward, our interactions with others, the interpersonal composite. This really demonstrates the ability to develop and maintain relationships based on trust and compassion, to articulate an understanding of another person's perspective, and to act responsibly while showing concern for others, your team, or your greater community or organization. And the three subscales that make up interpersonal are the interpersonal relationships, empathy, and social responsibility. Then we move to the next composite of decision making. And this explores how we use that emotional information as data when we're making decisions to arrive at optimal choices. Do we understand the impact our emotions have on our decision making, or do we let them cloud our judgment? And success in this area means that you can solve problems and devise effective solutions and deal realistically with situations, and also manage impulses that may disrupt effective decision making. And so the decision making composite is made up of problem solving, reality testing, and impulse control. Then the final composite is stress management. This area looks at how well we cope with our emotions associated with change and unfamiliar and unpredictable circumstances, whilst remaining hopeful about the future and also resilient in the face of setbacks and obstacles. And so success in this area means that you're able to remain calm and focused, change direction and beliefs when presented with new evidence. And that's really that flexibility and maintaining a positive attitude as well, and not caving in under pressure. And so the three subscales that make up the stress management are composite scale of flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism. Now, what you will see is that they're inextricably linked. So improving one area will have a positive impact on another area. For example, if you show empathy in your interactions, you're more likely to build productive interpersonal relationships. Or if you're better at impulse control, you're less likely to put yourself into situations that can cause you severe stress. And so that's just two of many examples that I can give to you. And with that, I'll just pause for a second and just to go to the first poll, if that's okay, Claire, if you could run the first poll around just getting your thoughts around how you see the importance of EQ as a governance professional. And so I'll be very, very interested in everyone's views around that. So the poll has come up here. So we'll just give a bit of time, Claire, shall we, for everyone to give their answers. Just seeing where we stand here. This is like watching a horse race here, actually, as I see that which ones come in. The interesting thing, actually, is that all of the areas people have put in different. Every one of them is populated. That's the thing, and very closely aligned as well. So interesting, very, very interesting. So. We have 60 answers so far.
I think everyone's answered now. So
wonderful. Okay, so this is very, very interesting, actually. Building influence, building resilience, dealing with difficult directors. Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. Become a better leader and coach. All of those around the 50% mark. So that's very interesting. To manage stress. As well, to be happier in my work. So in other words, 50% of you answered managing stress, for example. Absolutely, to be happier in your work. I think that's so important as well. Achieving work-life balance, all of those things absolutely critical. Improving skills as a communicator. So yeah, all of these are absolutely valid answers. And I think that the interesting point about here, of course, is that all of them are, I can see, I think, apart from perhaps one or two, are over 50%. In other words, most people see these as more important than not. And so that's really, has everyone seen the poll results, Claire?
Yeah, I've shared it.
Yeah,
I believe everybody should be able to see it.
very interesting. Yeah, okay. So I think all of these areas are absolutely key to it. It really does give you a greater awareness. I'll just come out of that. I'll just leave you to turn off the poll when you're ready,
Stop it now?
Claire,
Okay.
as well. Yeah, so now that everyone has had an opportunity to participate. And so all of these areas, I think, huge benefits, greater self-awareness, greater sense of who you are. I think when we talk about communication as well, that's about assertiveness skills and helping you with that ability to stand up for yourself and to communicate your feelings openly. Building resilience is really just having an optimistic outlook and being able to, ride the tough times that we always inevitably have in life and in work, and be able to bounce back with that optimistic attitude. Dealing with difficult directors, I think that's something that we always are going to face. I mean, just the fact that boards tend to be very A-type people, very strong personalities, and so we need to have skills to be able to deal with those situations. Becoming a better leader and coach, something we don't really touch on too much here, but certainly it's a huge EQ skill that I do explore in different forums. Managing stress as well, I think we could all use that, of course. It's very important that we do that, and I'll talk more about that as well. And happiness and achieving work-life balance, these are all things that we really strive for. So yeah, fantastic, some great questions here. And I think the good thing about this as well is that it really is, all of these skills are areas that will not just make you a more effective governance professional, but also will help you in your in your home, social, family life as well. I mean, my wife said to me that I'm a different person since I practiced EQ. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, because she did marry me after all, but I'll leave that to others to decide. Okay, so let's move on from that. One area actually that's around EQ that I wanted to explore, a specific area which is not commonly covered in EQ discussions yet, I think is one of the most important attributes for a governance professional, which is a growth or the learning mindset. And so much of the individual coaching that I do to governance professionals is to help them to break out of that sort of ingrained habits and that negative self-talk, which is often the result of a fixed mindset. And so the learning mindset draws on that concept that almost any field of human endeavor, sport, business, the arts, etc., can be dramatically influenced by how we think about our talents and our abilities. And so people who believe that their abilities are fixed are less likely to flourish than those with a growth mindset, rather than those who firmly believe that their abilities can be developed. And so people with a growth or learning mindset, they take a more constructive approach because they believe in their own abilities, but that their initial aptitudes and talents can change in growth through application, training, and experience. In other words, that they believe in their potential to achieve great things, but also equally recognizing that that can only be achieved through passion, hard work, and training. But they never beat themselves up through negative self-talk when they make mistakes. They use it rather as a learning opportunity to do better next time. And they're comfortable with themselves because they embrace their strengths and weaknesses in an authentic way. And they relish challenges as an opportunity to improve their skills or to try something new. And they enjoy a strong sense of purpose, and they place effort over natural talent. So really, ultimately, it comes down to an attitude of mind. And if you were to apply that to your role as a governance professional, that means being open to learning opportunities from your stakeholders. And even just attending today means just being open to new concepts and learning new things. And by applying that active listening, you can develop your knowledge and growth to build influence in your role. And I was able to use this to positive effect in my most recent role by really developing a reputation, I guess, as a go-to person. Now, that wasn't particularly because I had all the answers. It was more because I was approachable and listened and worked with them, collaborated with them to find solutions. So if we were to apply some of these concepts, what does success look like? So let's illustrate some of the areas that I've talked about. Now, for the longest time, as Claire mentioned, I've been a board, supporting boards for 25 years as a corporate secretary, as a governance professional. And so I've worked with lots of different boards and often always needed to have EQ-based skills. And I remember one time I worked with a board where two board members absolutely despised each other, and they used the boardroom to put each other down. And that had a ripple effect on other board members, and it hampered decision making. And I had to work closely with the board chair to work out approaches to deal with the problem. And this involved a review of the board processes to ensure that there were clear roles and responsibilities. But it also required separate mediation meetings with each of the directors to find out what their problem was with the other person. And then using that information to set up a mediation meeting whereby each party was given the opportunity to air their views, and at the same time reminded of their responsibilities as directors. Now, the meeting processes were also tightened so that neither individual was given the opportunity to attack the other in the meeting, and the wider board was constantly reminded of the need to engage in healthy debate, whereby members expressed their dissent in a constructive and courteous fashion. Now, the mediation meetings were a success, and both board members ultimately understood each other's perspective. And whilst they never became the best of friends, what they did do was to learn to work productively together as colleagues. Encouraging diversity of thought. I remember one time I worked with the board chair again, where the chair was concerned that there was insufficient diversity on the board. We had 12 directors, only two lady directors, two women directors, and they rarely contributed except to agree. And when they were asked about this, they said, well, there's little point in us expressing our views because we'll be outvoted anyway. So I worked with the chair to discuss strategies, and the chair made concerted efforts to be inclusive in decision making by actively canvassing the views of the two women board members. And he made it very clear that their views were welcomed, encouraged and expected, and that their independent views, no matter how contrary to the mainstream, had real credence and provided valuable insight to support rigorous, informed decisions. This didn't necessarily mean that their views prevailed, but they had their say and their opinions carried weight as part of the overall assessment of a decision. Effective challenge of management. So I worked with a regulated insurer a few years back, which had reporting functions to the local financial services regulator, OSFI. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with OSFI. And one of the key principles that the regulator insists upon is that within its corporate governance guidelines is the need for the board to avoid rubber stamping management's proposals and instead challenging management by raising probing questions, offering different perspectives, and analysing and debating proposals critically to ensure rigour. And so a summary of the questions and answers and the rationale for any decisions made needed to be included in the minutes of the meeting. And essentially, we viewed this as speaking to the regulator through the minutes, because those minutes were are open to inspection by the regulator. And so I worked with the board and some of the key directors to create that process for effective challenge and able to deliver that concept to the board. And what it meant is that we were able to satisfy the regulator in that way. Working in the corporate governance department for a large bank with a diverse range of subsidiaries also meant that there was good opportunity for talented directors to enhance their experience by serving on subsidiary boards. And it was incumbent on me to ensure that their orientation and training was effective as possible. And so because they were often new to holding the role as a director, they needed to change their sort of mindsets from that day-to-day management to a more detached oversight role. And this was something that I focused my orientation on, and helping them and coaching them with their fiduciary duties and responsibilities of a director so that they could fulfill those duties effectively. And it was just helping as well to change that sort of mindset around how they sort of viewed their role from the day-to-day, embroiled in the business, to taking more of a stewardship and oversight role.
Sorry, Paul?
Yeah. Sorry, Claire, you've gone.
Yeah. Your mic seems to be off a little bit again.
Okay, my apologies for that. I'm just going to maybe hold it in a different direction. How does that sound?
That sounds fine, I think.
Is that better? Yeah.
Yeah, that's better.
Perfect. Okay. Apologies, everyone, for that. No. It's joys of Zoom, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, actually, I thought it'd be good to run the second poll, Claire, which is particularly what particular challenges are you facing now where you think EQ would help? And so, what your current challenges are. I think it'd be interesting just to see where people land on this. And I think, again, there's multiple answers on this, Claire, as well.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. I'll launch it right now. Okay, so it's out there.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Something to think through. What are you suffering from at the moment? What are your pain points? Really, I think here is around EQ, and where can you develop? And that's something we'll be talking about briefly next.
Yeah. Oh.
So I'm just seeing how the results come in. Being able to communicate with impact. That's the current leader at the moment. Interesting, yeah. Managing stress levels. That's quite high. Again, being a better coach and leader. Relationship management, I think that's a key one. Strong relationships with directors and executive management. I think half the people see that as a key challenge for themselves. And this is obviously where you personally, as a governance professional, are finding challenges. Being able to communicate with impact looks like the leader there. That's an important one. And when I think about that as an EQ skill, I think of assertiveness as well, being able to stand your ground and having the courage sometimes to speak up around issues that may be of concern. And it's how you do it and the skill that you employ in doing so is a key factor. Okay, good. So we'll give a little bit of time. I see 62 out of 87. Yeah, a little bit more time for people to just participate. Or are we probably at the end?
I think 100%. Yeah. It's like 100% answer.
All right. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so the winner is being able to communicate with impact. Yeah, I think all of these are key challenges. And it's interesting to see that, these are areas where I think I know personally when I was working in different organizations, different cultures, that it was just really being able to, what is it I could do to build my influence and my impact? And communication was very important. Conflict resolution as well, that assertiveness. Very, very key to being able to, work collaboratively with strong personalities and building those relationships. And we see half of the people see relationship building as very, very key to success. Stress levels, 1/3 of you feel that that's an issue. And, I think stress is a big factor on our effectiveness. And how do we cope with that? How do we manage it? How do we ensure that stress doesn't overwhelm us? to the point where we can't effectively make decisions and work with impact in what we do. And of course, the thing with stress as well is it can flow. If you're not careful, it can flow outside of your work environment into your home and family life and so on. And it can have all sorts of unintended effects. And it becomes a vicious circle as well. So managing stress is very, very important. And that also comes down to the happiness and contentment in the work. So yeah, some great answers here. And I see that, there are a number of challenges that people have. So when we think about EQ, it really is a journey, not a destination. It's like learning a language. It takes time, practice, and guidance. And so the first thing really is to get a sense of where you are on the EQ scale. And you may think you're okay, but how do others perceive you? So doing an EQI self-assessment can be really astounding information, data. It opens up to me so many blind spots that I had, that I was immediately able to make improvements in my life very, very quickly by addressing those blind spots and also understanding how others perceive me. And there's plenty of resources out there, and I certainly highly recommend Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence book, which I referred to earlier as a starting point. I recommend my book too, Applying EQ as a Governance Professional. Of course I would, wouldn't I? But what I attempted to do really was to apply a lot of these principles specifically to our role. And I saw that there was a niche in the market for doing that. And I'm also conducting a pilot masterclass on EQ for the governance professional, which is, again, another unique product because of the target audience, because I feel that there's a real gap for this type of experiential learning. And of course, getting feedback from colleagues as well. And an EQ assessment can help you with that. And again, just to identify some of those blind spots. How's my mic doing, Claire? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
thumbs up there, fantastic. Okay, good. I'll try not to move around too much. They told me not to do an Irish jig whilst I was presenting, so I didn't. I'm not moving too much. I tend to, when I'm in person, I tend to move a lot more around the forum. So it's always a little bit of getting used to with Zoom. Okay, so just wanted to briefly talk about the pilot masterclass that I'm delivering, because this is really about putting real metrics around your EQ score so that you know your starting point. It's completely objective, the EQI assessment, and it's been validated over 20 plus years. And as part of the assessment, it includes a 1 hour personal debrief to go over your results. And the important thing here is that when I've talked to many professionals around EQ, they've always said, well, I think I'm okay. It's a little bit hard to put metrics around this because, it's just more of a perception. I think I'm okay, but I can't really measure it in the same way that we can measure financial bottom line. But actually, the EQI assessment allows you to do precisely that. And so what I've developed and in the process of developing is the pilot masterclass. I call it the Governance Professionals EQ Toolkit because it really covers 6 key areas, and over weekly 2-hour sessions. And the first one will cover, of course, and I focus on the composite areas, the composite scales. First of all, self-perception. So that's creating a foundation of self-awareness so that you understand and accept yourself and your strengths and weaknesses, how your emotions impact your work, and how you can achieve greater focus to identify what you need to live a rich and meaningful life. Then self-expression is around developing those assertiveness skills to communicate articulately, to actively listen, and to build conflict resolution and negotiating skills. Then the next week is interpersonal. developing great relationships and empathy for your stakeholders, and enhancing your role as an influencer and a trusted advisor and a leader that shows concern for others. And that's where we talk also about the coaching side, because I've seen that that's a very important part for a governance professional, is to be an effective coach. And that's something I always enjoyed, being a mentor and a coach to colleagues in my organization. Then we look at decision making, and it's that ability to use to make strong ethical and objective decisions, often in the face of pressure, and using your emotions as data, and to not let it cloud your judgment. And so how we do that, we talk about strategies for that. Stress management, again, we've seen how important that is. Building that resilience to cope with difficult and stressful situations, adapting and responding to changes to influence outcomes in a positive manner. All very, very important. And particularly one of the subscales for stress management is that optimistic outlook, because I think it's so much about your own perception, your own state of mind will really determine often how you see the world and how you cope with difficulties as well. And so we wrap all of that up with this sort of overall well-being and happiness, because achieving that sense of well-being, that contentment and that degree of optimism in your work, but it also includes developing a better work-life balance. And so the idea around this is that these 2-hour sessions will be interactive, they'll be very practically based, and there'll be a number of exercises and opportunities to network and to share experiences. And so when I run the pilot course, I've limited it to a maximum of 10 people, okay, because I think that in this type of forum, when you need it to be interactive and everyone to contribute and to share their own experiences, it's better to have a smaller group rather than a larger group. So that's something that I'm piloting. I'll be starting that in mid-February. And if anyone's interested, I've got my contact details at the end of today's session. I'll be very happy for you to contact me and talk about what your aspirations are and whether you think this may be helpful to you. I'd just like to maybe just pause there actually, and just if you could just spend a moment or two to just put in the chat to assess whether you think that type of course might be useful for you, or whether, what type of learning that you would really want to see from a course such as this. So I'll just maybe pause for a moment for you to put your comments in the chat function. And I'll just pull up myself as well. Just whether this is something that you feel could be of benefit to you. I went to a course a couple of years ago now, I suppose, and I found that the cost of the course, for example, was around $2,000, I'd say. It was a one-day course, and probably by the end of the week, I'd forgotten everything that I'd learned. The thing with this, what I've tried to develop here that I'm really excited about delivering, is that this is something where you develop your skills over time, and you really build on the experiences of others and work on with each other as well. That's why the maximum of 10 people, I find that is the best size group that people can really interact with each other, to network, share those experiences, and of course work in between the sessions as well, to work on those areas that we've covered, all of those concepts. Because as I've mentioned before, EQ is a testing ground for everything. Life is a testing ground, I should say, for EQ, because we need it every single day. Every moment we wake up and we interact with people is something that we need to have. And I'm hoping that it will get you from, well, I'm confident that it will get you from this to this. Now, thanks everyone for your comments around that. And Susan, I purchased the book. I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you so much, Susan. Please feel free to leave a review and let me know how you got on with it, because again, I'm very, very passionate and very excited about all of this area. I think it's such a important area for us as governance professionals to work together and to clearly support each other in this sort of EQ journey. And so I've really had the privilege to talk with so many different governance professionals around EQ and what it means to them, and seeing improvements as well. I think that's very, very important. So I didn't want to leave you with nothing as such, with some thoughts obviously, but I didn't want to leave you just walking away around that. I wanted to give you something practical to take away. How are we for time, Claire? I just have about 2 minutes or so that I wanted to yeah. Very good. And I'd like some time for questions as well, because I always think it's very important to have questions as well. So if everyone will bear with me just around any questions that you have, and to really just take away some of these exercises, because I think these are very, very important. As I mentioned, learning EQ is really a discipline. It's like learning an instrument. It takes time, practice, patience and consistent effort and guidance. And so here's a couple of exercises that are in my book, and there's many more, of course, examples in there, but I thought I'd select a couple here that might be useful. The emotional ripple effect, what does that mean? Well, just like a stone dropped into water, your emotions cause ripples in the life of the people around you. So at the end of the day, as an exercise, take a few minutes to reflect on your behaviour during the day and the effect it may have had on your colleagues. Think about whether your behaviour was in line with your values and how it was perceived by your team. If on reflection you feel that your behaviour could have been better, consider what you learned from it, how you can improve next time, and if required, how you can repair the relationship with the affected individual. So it's just that self-reflection. That's what I'm really keen for you to think about. Second one is watching your internal dialogue. Now, if you have a friend that tells you that they have really messed up, you're probably likely to give them comfort and support, even give them reassurance that it wasn't so bad. Yet all too often when we make mistakes, our internal voice is not a friend, but an enemy that is judgmental and critical and makes us feel even worse than we perhaps already feel. So listen carefully to your internal dialogue and check, what is it that you're saying to yourself every single day? Because you can change that internal dialogue as well by being aware of your thought processes and writing down every occasion that you become aware of your negative thoughts, and training your internal dialogue to be more supportive can significantly impact the way that you feel and help you to develop confidence and self-esteem. So practice turning negative statements into positive ones. Replace self-judgmental thoughts such as, I'm an idiot, by, I made a mistake, or accepting responsibility for your actions by saying, oh, it's all my fault, to, what can I do to rectify this? Practice the art of listening. We talked about how important that is for a socially aware governance professional. And I think of the modern work environment not really conducive to active listening. It's not just about hearing the words that are said, it's also having the discipline not to interrupt and to focus on the message that you're receiving with a view to understanding, rather than merely waiting for your turn to speak. And this takes practice and conscious effort to ensure that your concentration doesn't wander. So when you're listening, don't check your phone, don't type an email, don't look at something else when you're listening, because these distractions will reduce your comprehension and understanding. But do repeat back and summarize the message in your own words to check your understanding with the other party, because people will truly appreciate being listened to. And so it is a great opportunity to build relationships, because when you're, if you think about somebody that truly listens to you and gets what you're trying to say, how great is that? What a great feeling that can be. And it can really enhance your interpersonal relationships. The final one is to take feedback in your stride. Now, feedback can be a unique gift because if delivered well, it gives us the opportunity to have a different perspective, to cast a spotlight on our blind spots and to build our self-awareness. And as a governance professional, you're more likely to receive critical feedback than thanks and plaudits. It's always the 99 things we do well and the one thing that we didn't do so well that gets called out. So consider who is given the feedback and be prepared to, again, actively listen and hear what's been said. And practice asking clarifying questions and seek examples to better understand the other person's perspective. And whether you agree with the feedback or not, consider it as an opportunity for gaining a different viewpoint. And if you're confident in your own abilities, then that feedback can be viewed as valued information that you can then decide what to do with that information. Okay, so there's a few thoughts and exercises for you to consider to really enhance your EQ from a practical level. That will just get you started on that EQ journey. I think when I consider EQ, we've touched on a few concepts here. It's such a vast subject and one that is evolving rapidly as well. And so I hope that you found some of these points useful. And I would very much welcome the opportunity to have further dialogue with you around EQ and how I can help you, maybe giving different perspectives. And just before we go to Q&A, perhaps again, if you could, just put into the chat function the one key takeaway that resonated with you. What is it about what you heard today that really resonated and that you think will help you going forward in your role as a governance professional? Please think a few moments to that, because I want to give you a call to action. To your next step is to apply some of the points that you've learned here and put them into practice, put them into governance situations, and think about how you are perceived and how you work with your colleagues. And that's something where, again, I can offer a great deal of support around individual coaching. Please let me know about the masterclass as well. That's something which I'm very excited to deliver, and I know has generated a fair bit of interest as well. And please connect with me as well on LinkedIn. My QR code is here, and it will get you straight to my LinkedIn page. Please connect and tell me what you gain most from the session, because it's something valuable feedback for me as well. And I'll just ask as well, please send a post about this webinar to your governance LinkedIn contacts, and with a link to my book, and tag me. Always open to talking to governance professionals.